this masterclass, we're going to look at filters in Jadu Connect. So it's quite a small topic, but it's one that we've had a few questions about recently, particularly in terms of how to get other services using dashboard filters. So I was really going to give you sort of an overview of filters, what they're for, how you can use them, the sort of scenarios where services might want to use them, and the types of information you can display on a filter, and what you can use for generating filters. So I'm just going to jump to my cases tab. So cases is where you will see your filters. So as you can see, I've got 6 filters currently displaying. I'm going to go in and hide a couple of these so we can show you what comes out of the box initially. So filters are effectively a way of setting up sort of dashboard views of cases within Connect. Out of the box, there are 4 standard filters. You have all cases, which will display a list of any cases that you have permission to view as a user. My cases, which would be cases that are directly assigned to you or to the team that you work in. Starred cases. So when you're looking at a case, you do have the option to add a star to it. So if I go in, let's just pick one. This hasn't got any data in it, but you can see up here by the case reference, I've got the option to add a star. When I do that, if I go to my filter and starred cases, that case will now appear in my starred list. So if there are a number of cases that I'm working on actively, I can add a star to them, so I can easily just jump in and access my list of cases that I'm currently working through. And then the other standard filter is really just the recently viewed filter, which displays a list of any cases that you've viewed or interacted with as a user. These filters are the same for everybody. Where the filters come in really useful is that you can build your own custom filters. And these filters could either be just for yourself as an individual user. You can save a filter so it's available to everyone within your group within Connect. You can save it so it's visible to all users or just all staff users. So if you're working in a team, and as a team, you'll have a number of filters potentially that you might be using for managing things like your work queue, then you can create a filter around that. So I've got a couple of examples of custom filters that I've put in here. So when I'm working through my examples today, I'm going to use my business inquiries case type for these. So we'll pretend that I'm working in the business group within Connect. So what I've got is I've got a filter here that shows me a list of all the business inquiries that have been raised in the system. So this is just a very simple filter based on case type. I've also got a filter here that I've set up, which show me a list of any business inquiries that are currently at the open status. So this might be, pending inquiries that I've not gone in and dealt with yet, of which there aren't any. So the idea is that one of the primary ways for using filters is as a way of creating work queues and dashboard views that you can use for managing your workload within Connect as a service user. So if I wanted to create a list, create a new filter, I'd go to the filters option, and I have a new filter option here. If I select this, I then get my plus symbol and my option to filter by. And when I click on this, it will give me a list of any elements or objects within Connect that I can use for filtering. Now, as standard, you can filter on choice fields. So any drop down or radio button fields that you have in the system, you can use them to filter. Case dates, case types. So you can create a filter based on a specific case type. You can filter based on the group that's assigned to the case, whether a case is assigned to you directly. You can filter it on creation dates, either based on a range of dates or based on cases that have been created today. You can filter based on when a case was last updated. So again, these three things are just directly related to automatically captured system dates. So we always know when a case has been created and when it's been last updated. You can filter based on your case statuses, and also whether a case has been transitioned today. So in my list here, I have a whole mix of options based on, as we can see here, I've got a number of different SLA dates in the system that I could filter based on. If I wanted to filter based on the SLA status of an item, I could select, I can type in SLA and it will start to filter my list. If I select SLA status, this is a choice field, so I could select which options I want to apply in my filter. So let's say I want to, as a user in the business inquiries team, I want to create a filter list for reporting that shows me all of my business inquiry cases that have met their SLA date. So they've been dealt with, and we've dealt with those inquiries within our service level agreement. If you want information about how you can set things up like service level agreements, that was all covered in one of our previous masterclasses on dates in the system, which is available on our YouTube channel if you wanted to review that. But I've created a rule in my case that effectively sets a flag based on the case status and the SLA date to indicate whether a case has met or missed its SLA. So I could create a filter based on that. So the first thing I could do is say, I want to create my filter based on my case type. And I can start typing in the field to then filter the list to find my business inquiry case type. So I'm going to add that. And then that will list me all of my business inquiry cases. Now, what I want to do is I want to narrow that down to a list of business inquiry cases that have met their SLA date. So I'm going to add a secondary filter option for SLA status. And I'm going to say, I want the SLA status to be met. And that will then narrow down my list to a list of business inquiries that have met the SLA. Equally, I could say, show me a list of any that have missed their SLA date. Of which I have two. Or I could add a combination of options from that drop down, from that choice field. When you look at filters, by default, the filters will give you some very basic information. So you can see here that I've literally just got the case reference number, case type, the date that that case was submitted, and what the current status of that case is. So if I want to add additional data to my filter so that it shows me more information when I'm viewing my dashboard, then I have the option of adding columns. So I have a number of columns here. So if I go in, you can see there's a long list of columns. So let's say I want to display what the SLA date was for that case. So I could select my SLA date. I'll show you what both of these do in a moment. These are just different examples of different columns that I've created. So if I select SLA date as my case date, well, that's interesting. For these, I don't have an SLA date in the system. Let's go back and change my filter status. Let's find my other filter. Let's have a look. I'm going to add my other column just in case there's information in that one. There we go. So you can see in this case, this is my SLA date as a case field, and it's displaying what the SLA date was for each of these cases. I could go in and add, any of these fields where I'm using that data field within my case. So if I was capturing the user's name, I could display the customer name, which I haven't captured in this case. Now, columns, there isn't a default set of columns that are available. They're the standard ones that just come out of the box for things like reference, case type, status. But you do have the ability to add additional data columns into your system that can be used when people are building dashboard filters. So if I go to settings, right at the top, you'll see I've got this option for case list columns. If I select that, it'll show me a list of all the columns that are currently in my system. But let's say I want to create a new one. I want to create a column to actually show me the SLA status in my list. So I am going to create a column. I'm going to call it SLA status. I can decide who should be able to see that in terms of roles in the system. So I'm going to say that this should only be visible to staff for reporting effectively. Don't necessarily want the customer to see that data potentially, or third parties. I can decide what position I want that to display in when I've got a list of columns. This sometimes becomes a bit of guesswork, particularly if you've got a lot of columns that you're using. So I'm going to pick a random number. I'm going to say, let's put it in position 9. And then I have a number of different options for the type of data that I can want to push into this column. So I could simply select the address. So if the case is linked to an address, it will display that. I could pick it to display a specific case date, as in the SLA case date that I chose. Case membership. So if I selected that option, I could decide what it will then show me, if I select staff, what staff members are associated with that case. Case status, we already have a default one for that. Case system date. So if I select that, it gives me a list of all of the standard system dates that are captured in relation to a case. So a system date is a date that's automatically applicable to every single case in the system. So a case will always have a creation date, the date when it was last updated, and a date when it was completed or moved to its final status. Case type, there's already a default filter for that, just displays the case type. Case value, so this allows you to pick any field that you have in the system to display. I'll come back to this one in a moment, because this is the one that I'm going to use in my example. Person, so do you want to display the person record details that the case is linked to? Or twig template. So this is something more for developers, where you can use a twig piece of code to pull a value from the system if it's not specifically in the, say, a case value. So in my example, I'm going to choose a case value, and then I can choose my field that I want to use. So in this case, I'm going to use my SLA status. So if I save that, The other sort of option I have here just before I do that is I can decide if I want this column to be displayed on all of the 4 standard filters that come out of the box. So you can add additional default information to those standard filters if you want to. I'm not going to add this one to those. I'm just going to save this as sort of a standalone column that I can add to any filters when I'm using the system. When I've saved my new case column, it will become available for me to add under the columns link on my filter. So I would then be able to go in and select it from my list. I'm going to choose something different. Let me just choose any of these. So if I add this one in, you can see that it then adds that to my filter. So you can see with some of these, they've actually reached the point where the data's been redacted. So I've got, this is a choice field that sets a value against the case. So you can see that it's listing it as deleted. So these are cases where the personal data has been removed from the case based on a certain time frame. So you can create a filter based on specific set of criteria. You can add a set of columns to that filter to display additional information when you're viewing it. You can create new columns if they don't exist. The reason that I've put these 2 in is just as one thing that you may want to keep in mind is if you are using your filter for managing a work queue. So let's say this is a filter based on bookings to visit the recycling centre, and you might have staff at the recycling centre checking people in based on their appointment date. Or they might want to create a filter so they can see what traffic they're expecting that day if you're using bookings. When you use an SLA date case field, or you've added a date field to your column, when we're talking about a case field as opposed to a case date, which is something slightly different, this will literally just display the data from that field in the list. And that your list will just appear in order of when that information was submitted. If you want to be able to relist your cases in your filter based on a date, then you need to use a case date. So you can see here I've got my SLA date, and on this one it gives me my arrows here. So if I'm using a case date in the system, I can reorder my list chronologically. So if this was my bookings case, I could reorder it so it shows me sort of my newest bookings or my oldest bookings first. Once you're happy with your filter, you can save it. So if I choose to save it, if this is a filter I'm going to be using time and time again, I can click save, and I can give my filter a title. Let me just give this a... And I can then decide whether this filter should be visible just for me, so only I can access this filter in the system, whether it's visible to everyone in my team or my group that I'm part of in Connect. So in this case, my user is associated with the internal training group. Whether it's visible to all staff users, so anyone who is classed as a staff user in Connect would be able to choose this filter to display on their dashboard. Or whether it's literally available for everyone who has access to Connect. The thing to keep in mind with this one is it would make that filter available to customers, but the customer will still only see cases that they've got permission to view. So it's not going to suddenly start showing the customer a list of cases that they shouldn't be able to access. So the customer would still only see their own cases in the system. What we sometimes use this one for is if we're designing a process that's maybe built around the citizen role, and and it's a filter that's related to a specific service request where it makes sense in terms of the user journey and the user experience for the citizen to be able to access that. An example might be something like a recruitment process that you're managing on behalf of someone. So recently we did some development work for a team that wanted to be able to manage online job applications in the system, but outsource them to individual schools within the area. So this would give you the ability to create a filter of, current job applications that have been received. But because of the way the applications are assigned in the system, we could have a filter that's available to everyone that a school could select, but then they'll only see cases that have been directly assigned to them. But it's available to all the schools to use that single filter, even though the users in that school are classed as a citizen user. It's quite hard to explain that one, but hopefully that makes sense. So with this one, I'm going to say this is one just for my team. So once I've saved that, anyone in my team should be able to go to the cogwheel up here in the top right where it says choose filters and be able to select that filter and turn it on and off on their dashboard. So you can see here, I have a list of all the filters that I have access to, some of which have been created by me, some of which have been created by my colleagues. So I said one example of the way in which you might want to use filters is for service areas to use them to generate their work queues for managing their cases within Connect based on specific criteria. So if you're an example of someone working in a recruitment team, you might have a filter for pending job applications, shortlisted applications. So you've got clear views so you can see where everything is. What you can also use filters for is for extracting data from the system. So whenever you have a filter, a custom filter, if I go to the actions list, I can export that data as a CSV file. So I can effectively get a spreadsheet with all of that information in it. If I select export as CSV, I can either export it with all the columns that are available in the system or just the columns that I'm displaying on my dashboard, which is probably the one that you would use most of the time. So if I select this option, it's going to send me a CSV with all of the cases that have been returned in my filter, showing me the reference, name, case type, submitted date, status, my 2 SLA fields, and my sort of redaction status. So I can select to export that. Because a filter may contain a lot of records, it doesn't do it straight away. It's a scheduled task. So it generates the export and will then send you an email to let you know when that filter export is ready for you to download. And then to keep everything secure, it will prompt you to log in to download it. So one of the things that people often ask about in relation to Connect is reporting options. So in the system, there's some very basic reporting around case volumes, which literally will show you the number of cases created, either overall or based on a specific service or based on a particular workflow within a time frame that you define. If you want more complex reporting on other things, then you can effectively use dashboard filters to build up a filter that displays all of the data that you want to export for your reporting. You can save that filter if it's going to be something that you're going to use regularly. And then, as I said, you can export that data as a CSV file. Another example where you may use filters is you can use filters alongside the Jadu API. So probably the best example of this is in terms of the service API for Connect. When we talked about data redaction on the data retention masterclass that we talked about, one of the ways that you can trigger data retention in Connect is by setting up a data retention filter. So you can set a flag against the case to determine whether it should be redacted or not. You can set that up so there's a rule in that case type to trigger the case to set that field based on a case state, and then you can have a filter that then just automatically displays all of the cases that have that flag set against them as a choice field. So you could have a list of cases set up where the to be redacted status is set to be redacted, or whatever you might want to call it. And then the service API can use that filter to determine what data cases to delete from the system effectively. If you wanted a more detailed session on using filters with the API, then please let us know, and I can talk to one of my more technical colleagues, and we can see if we could get something set up as a masterclass, as more of a technical one. So with filters, that there's not a lot to them, but they can be extremely useful based on those sorts of scenarios. It's certainly something that's worth, when you're working with services to potentially design workflows that they'll be using, it's certainly worth discussing filters with them and making them aware that they do have this ability to go in and create filters to help them manage their workloads more effectively within Connect, or to get that additional reporting data out of the system if they need to. We quite often get comments that services don't often use filters, so we always recommend that it would be something that's definitely worth discussing with services when you're in the middle of a process design with them. It is something that's also covered, the basics of creating and saving filters, as part of the free service area focused course that's available online for Connect. So we obviously have our sort of standard full platform training that's available for users to purchase, but because of the way that Connect is set up with the intention that actually, you could have a huge number of users across the council who are using Connect at a more sort of everyday working level. There is a free online course that just covers the very basics of interacting with customer records and cases and creating filters. So it's often worth, where you're working with a service area, potentially signposting that to them. If anybody needs to know where to access that course, then let us know and we can send a link out. We're currently in the process of planning what our next masterclass is going to be. So we'll be sending information out about that soon. If you do have anything particular that you would like us to look at on a masterclass, then please feel free to send any suggestions in to us. So the marketing team are collating those, and we can have a look and we can see what customers are looking at, and base our masterclasses around that. Ideally, what we like to do is to base these on what your requirements are and what particular things you're interested in looking at in the system. So send in as many suggestions as you want. But if there are no questions, we'll finish up for the morning there.